in this video we are going to discuss a very important topic from research aptitude, that is scales of measurement. So in this session we'll be concentrating on this term, what is the scales of measurement, then we'll be moving into the different kinds or different types of scales of measurement, and also we'll be focusing on a few sample questions that were asked from this particular area in NTA UGC in December 2021 and June 2022 merge cycles as well. So initially we'll be focusing on this question, what are scales of measurement? So the scales of measurement is also known as levels of measurement, and these are basically measurement scales that we are using in order to qualify or quantify the data variables that are being used in a particular research. Or in other words, we can say that we are using different types of data variables for our particular research that we are focusing on. So based on the type of data that is collected, we'll be focusing, or we'll be just selecting the appropriate measurement scales in order to measure that data variable that we are using. So basically each scale of measurement, we have basically 4 different kinds or types of scales of measurement, and each of these measurement scales has properties that basically determines how to measure the data or how to properly analyze the data that are being collected. So that is the idea behind it. So we have 4 different types of scales of measurement. As I have already mentioned, we are using these measurement scales in order to qualify or quantify the data variables that are being collected, and each of these scales of measurement is basically having properties that actually determine how to analyze or properly analyze the data that is being used in a particular research. That is the idea behind scales of measurement. So as I have already mentioned, we have 4 different types of scales of measurement, which includes nominal scale, ordinal scale, interval scale, and finally ratio scale. So these are the 4 different types of measurement scales. So now what we are going to do is we are just focusing on each of these scales in detail. So how these different types, or what are the properties of each of these scales, and that will actually give you an idea what kind of data variables can be qualified or quantified using this particular measurement scales that I mentioned here. So the first measurement scale, or the scale of measurement that we are going to discuss in this session, is nominal scale. And if you consider nominal scale, we can say that we are using this scale in order to measure or in order to analyze qualitative data. So that is why it is mentioned here as qualitative, or we are using this scale in order to categorize or group the data that we are being collected. So a nominal scale is a scale of measurement used to assign events or objects into discrete categories. So we are using nominal scale for data that can be categorized or grouped, but that cannot be ranked. Okay, so these kinds of data can be measured using nominal scale. I'll just give you an example. So if you consider this question that is asked here, what is your hair color? So if you are collecting a data and your question is what is your hair color, and there are certain colors that are mentioned here. We have brown, black, blonde, gray, and other colors. So what is mentioning here? What is the idea behind that? So if you are collecting a data that is based on the hair color of a group of people, we can actually collect this data and group these different people into different hair color groups, right? If you consider here, we can say that 1 is brown, 2 is black, 3 is blonde. We have different numbers given here. So these are just labels or tags, and that doesn't give a particular order to these different colors. That means if you just mentioned brown as the first color under the question, what is your hair color, that doesn't mean this brown is somewhere more attractive, or it is somewhere superior to black. It doesn't have an order here. We are just using these tags in order to label or in order to categorize these different colors. That's it. It doesn't give us an order in which the first one is better than the third one, or the fifth one is not that much good compared to the second one. It's not like we are ordering them. It's just we are categorizing. If we are using this question, or if we are collecting data based on the hair color of different people, you can collect their data and we can actually categorize these different people into different groups or different color or different hair color groups. Okay, so that is what nominal scale focuses on. So a nominal scale describes a variable with categories that do not have a natural order or ranking. So that is what we have mentioned there as well. So we are using this nominal scale in order to describe a variable that can be categorized, but we cannot rank them. Or in other words, we can say that these categories or these collected data or variables that does not have a natural order or rank. It cannot be ranked, but we can categorize or we can group them into different groups are categorized. Okay, so as I have already mentioned, we are used or in that particular example that we have taken, we have just used different numbers, right? So these numbers serve only as tags or labels to identify or classify an object. So if you are asking a question, what is your hair color? And if we're giving certain hair colors with the number tags, that are just tags or labels in order to specifically mention the different categories. If you are using 1, 2, 3 as numbers, that doesn't mean just have an order in that sense. Okay, so what you have to focus here is if you're using nominal scale, or for what kind of data you can use nominal scale for the measurement, for data that can be categorized but it cannot be ranked. So this is nominal scale, and now we are moving to the second type of scale, that is ordinal scale. So what is the peculiarity of ordinal scale? This ordinal scale can be used for variables or data variables which can be categorized as well as ranked. So that is the peculiarity of ordinal scale. When we have discussed about nominal scale, what do we have mentioned there? This nominal scale is used for data variables that can be categorized but they cannot be ranked. But it comes to, or when it comes to ordinal scale, we can use ordinal scale for variables that can be both categorized as well as ranked, and it is usually used to measure qualitative concepts. Again, I'll just show an example. Let's consider this example that is given here. How satisfied are you with our service? And we have various options given: very unsatisfied, somewhat unsatisfied, neutral, somewhat satisfied, very satisfied. So what is the peculiarity of this particular question, or if you're just asking this question in order to collect data regarding the service that you're providing, what is the concept behind it? So if you're using this question and if you're collecting data, we have different categories that are given here. There might be people who are very unsatisfied with your performance or with your service. There are some people, yeah, okay, that kind of an approach is there in someone, so that is somewhat unsatisfied, so very neutral kind of an approach. Then certain people think that they are somewhat satisfied about your service, so we can actually categorize these variables or these data variables. At the same time, we can rank them as well. If you consider these different options that are given here: very unsatisfied, somewhat unsatisfied, neutral, somewhat satisfied, very satisfied. So we can see an order here, right? So very satisfied means you're that much appreciating their service and you're that much satisfied. And somewhat satisfied means you're not that satisfied, but it's okay. Right, so that's kind of an order can be traced in these different options that are given here. So if you're collecting a data variable like this, we can use the ordinal scale in order to measure that. That means we're using ordinal scales for variables that can be both categorized as well as ranked. type or kind of scale, that is interval scale, and we are using interval scale for the variables that involves quantity. Okay, so the other two, the ordinal as well as the nominal, we are using these kinds of scales in order to measure the qualitative concepts, right? So interval scale as well as the final scale that we are going to discuss, that is ratio scale, both these scales are used in order to measure quantity or the variables that involves quantity. And this particular scale can be used for variables which can be categorized, ranked, as well as can be expressed in increments with non-measurable, consistent and equal intervals. So what is the peculiarity here? When we have discussed about nominal scale, we have said that it can be used for variables that can be categorized but not ranked. When it comes to ordinal scale, we can use that particular scale for variables that can be categorized as well as ranked. Coming to interval scale, what is the peculiarity here? We are using interval scale for the variables that can be categorized, ranked, and also it can be expressed in equal intervals. So one of the most important or most common example that you can take in order to understand the variables that can be measured in interval scale is temperature. So if you consider this particular example here, what is the peculiarity of the data that is given here? So if you consider the temperature, for example, what are the peculiarities of the variables that are involved in, or that can be, or the data that can be measured by interval scale can be categorized. So if you consider temperature, for example, we have different categories of temperature. You have minus 30 degrees Celsius, you have minus 20 degree, minus 10 degree, then you have 10 degrees Celsius. So different categories can be identified there, and also it can be ranked. So that means if you just consider this temperature for an example, 20 degrees Celsius is a high temperature compared to 10 degrees Celsius. So you can rank them. So this can be ranked as well. And also it says that this data or these variables can be expressed in measurements or increments with non-measurement. Increments with non-measurable, consistent and equal intervals. That means if you consider this data that is given here, for example, temperature, you have equal intervals 10, 20, 30, 40, 50. So the difference between these two levels are equal in each of the intervals. So it's equal increment, right? So that is again a very important example or very important peculiarity of the variable that can be measured using interval scale. So what are the peculiarities here? It can be categorized, it can be ranked, as well as it can be expressed in equal intervals, or it can be expressed in increments with non-measurable as well as consistent and equal intervals. So that is the peculiarity of variables. Or if you have a data variable like this, you can use interval scale in order to measure that. Going to the last and final kind of type of scales of measurement, that is ratio scale. So what is the peculiarity here? Again, this is used in order to it is used for measuring data variables that are involving quantity. Okay, so ratio scale is used when a variable can be categorized, ranked and expressed in equal intervals and can have an absolute zero value. That is, the starting point of the scale is taken as 0. So what is the peculiarity here? If you are using ratio scale, your data should be, or it can be expressed, or it can be categorized, ranked, and also it could be expressed in equal intervals, and also it can have an absolute zero value. That means the value or the measurement should start from it should have a starting point and it is taken as 0. If you consider the previous example that we have considered under the interval scale, what was the peculiarity here? It can be categorized, of course, it can be ranked, and it can be expressed in equal intervals, or it can be expressed in equal measurable increments. But if you consider here, it is not starting from a 0 point, right? It doesn't have an absolute 0. Its starting point is not just, or its starting point is not 0. So that is the difference between interval scale and ratio scale. So for ratio scale, what we have said here is, it is used for variables that can be categorized, ranked, it can be expressed in equal intervals, and also it can have an absolute 0 value. That means the starting point of the scale is taken as 0. The perfect example that you can consider for ratio scale in order to understand the variable that can be measured under ratio scale is the speedometer. Okay, so if you consider here, what is the peculiarity? we have different speeds that are given here, and it can be categorized. Of course, it is mentioned, or it is having different speeds, so it can be categorized. It can be ranked, yeah, again true, because as if you consider 120 km per hour is obviously greater than 80 km per hour. So in that sense, it can be ranked, and also it can be expressed in equal intervals or increments that are measurable and equal, or measurable and equal intervals can be seen in the data that is given here. So we have 0, then 20, 40, 60, 80, so equal intervals between each of the variables that are given here. And also it is starting from a 0 point. It is having an absolute 0 point. So the scale starts from 0, right? So this is a peculiarity of the data, or these kinds of variables can be measured and ratio scale. So in that sense, if you consolidate what we have discussed so far, we can say that if you consider nominal scale is used for variables that can be named or that can be categorized. Coming to ordinal scale, that can be used for variables that can be named or categorized, and also variables that can be ordered. Coming to interval scale, what is the peculiarity? Named, ordered, and also proportionate interval between variables. So interval scales can be used for variables that can be categorized, we can call it as named, and you can use it for, or these variables can be named or categorized, and it can be ordered, and also it can be expressed in equal intervals as well, or there is proportionate interval between the variables. And coming to ratio scale of measurement, it can be used for variables that can be named or categorized, ordered, proportionate interval between variables, and also it can accommodate absolute 0, or the scale starts from 0. So that is a peculiarity of variables that can be measured by this particular scale, that is ratio scale. Now I hope you got an idea about the 4 different kinds of scales of measurement, and now we are moving to the questions. Some of the sample questions that were asked in December 2021 and June 2022 merged cycles in an exam from this particular area, that is scales of measurement. So here I have the first question. A true 0 point as the feature of, and we have the options nominal scale, ratio scale, interval scale, and ordinal scale. We have already discussed about this in the session itself. So a true 0 point, absolute 0, can be considered as a feature of which scale? Of course, it is a feature of ratio scale. So the right answer for this question is option B. Moving to the next question, which of the following is considered as the highest scale in measurement? And we have the options nominal, ordinal, interval, and ratio. So we have 4 different types or kinds of scales of measurement, and we consider ratio scale as the highest scale in measurement. In that sense, we can see that the right answer for this question is option D, that is ratio scale. Moving to the next question, the ratio level of measurement or the ratio scale of measurement has a constant odd number, a true 0 point, unique applications, limited use in physical sciences. So what is the peculiarity of ratio level of measurement, or what is that one feature that is actually contributing, or that is making ratio special, or this ratio scale of measurement special? That is obviously an absolute 0 value, that is a true 0 point, right? So that is the peculiarity of ratio level of measurement. So we can consider option B as the right answer, a true 0 point. So in this session, we have discussed about scales of measurement, a very important idea or concept that you have to learn under research aptitude. We have just focused on a few questions that were asked from this particular area in the very recent exam as well. So there are other chances also. They can ask you this particular, or they can ask you mass following questions from this particular area. In the previous exam, we have got those kinds of questions as well. So make sure that you have a very good idea about the 4 different types or kinds of measurement scales, and have a thorough idea about the features as well. So I hope this video will be really helpful in your preparations, and if you know, or if you want to know more about our courses, you can just contact the number that is given in the description box. We have offline classroom as well as online courses available. So thanks for watching and happy learning.